Okay, so in this video we're going to look at Before You Were Mine by Duffy. The questions are below. You just need to answer those before checking your answers against what I'm saying here. And the pink lines are the ones that I've suggested you might actually remember for your GCSE exams. Okay, so getting into it, it starts off with, I'm 10 years away from the corner you laugh on with your pals. And the perspective of this poem is really interesting. It's written from the perspective of the poet, Duffy, and she's actually imagining her mother and her mother's friends at the start, or rather than imagining, she seems to be looking at a photograph basically, but she is remembering her mother as she used to be before the poet was actually herself alive. So we've got this bit of imagery at the start. We've got you with your pals, Maggie Bikini and Jean Duff, and the three of them are bending from the waist, holding each other or their knees and shrieking at the pavement. And the idea is that actually they're doubled over in hysterics. They're finding something so funny that they're bent over and they're shrieking their laughter basically. And so Caroline Duffy is remembering or seeing this moment where her mother is having such a great time, and it's before the poet was actually herself even born. In line 5 we've got this reference to a polka dot dress. Your polka dot dress blows around your legs, Marilyn. And the idea of her wearing a polka dot dress is very glamorous. The idea of it blowing around her legs, again, showing a bit of leg is a little bit more glamorous. And yeah, she's supposedly a very beautiful person. You've also got this reference to Marilyn here, this minor sentence, which is a reference to Marilyn Monroe, one of the most, if not the most, glamorous actresses Hollywood has ever produced. And so the idea is that her mother is equally glamorous, just like Marilyn Monroe is. And there's a really famous picture that this is actually referring to. The idea that her dress blows around her legs is when Marilyn Monroe was singing to the President of the United States, and she was on a fan and having to hold her dress down so that it wasn't revealing anything else. If you search it up on Google, you'll find it. It's very, very famous. Moving on to the second stanza. She starts with this sentence, I'm not there yet, I'm not here yet, and the thought of me doesn't occur. So the poem is clearly set before the poet was alive, and so it's when the mother was younger. The thought of her doesn't occur, so the thought of the poet doesn't occur. In the ballroom with 1,000 eyes, the fizzy movie tomorrow is the right walk home could bring. And so the idea is that in the ballroom, her mother's going to be dancing, and there's going to be 1,000 eyes on her, so 500 people all watching, all the people dancing in this ballroom, including the mother. And you've got another reference to Hollywood, the fizzy movie tomorrow's the right walk home could bring. So in this case, it's another reference to glamorous Hollywood. Fizzy probably because of the nature of film and how it used to pop a little bit more, rather than actually being digital nowadays, back when it was analog. The reference to the right walk home could bring suggests that she's meeting lots and lots of boys and dancing with lots of boys at these ballrooms, and she just needs to pick the right one to go home with, basically. So her mother is very glamorous, a very good dancer, and also attracts the attention of lots of boys. We have this next line, I knew you would dance like that, so she's imagining her mother dance, and then before you were mine, your ma stands at the close with a hide-in for the late one. Now a hide-in is a beating basically, so by the time she gets home she's so late, her mother is so angry that she actually smacks her mother, so the grandmother is hitting the mother in this case, and they've got this, you reckon it's worth it. So the mother of the poet is more than happy to get a smack by the grandmother for being so late, because it's had such a good evening dancing and with all the boys that she's attracting attention from. Moving on, it goes into this quotation, the decade ahead of my loud possessive yell was the best one, eh? And the interesting part about this one is the idea that it's a possessive yell. So when she's a baby, the poet is possessively screaming as if she owns the mother and takes up all of her time. And it's a question, she's actually questioning her mother as well, so this interrogative is basically the poet addressing her mother, the mother that's not actually with her anymore, so she's dead by the time that Caroline Duffy is writing this poem. But essentially the poet is trying to imagine back in the life of her mother, to imagine the life of her mother before Caroline Duffy was around, and saying that it was much more glamorous, much better than when the poet was actually born, because she's possessive and taking up all her time. You also get this reference to, I remember my hands in those high-heeled red shoes, relics. And so what's actually being said is that the poet here is remembering playing with her mother's heels, and she put her hands in her mother's heels and used to walk around in them pretending that she was as glamorous and could dance like her mother could. But the idea of calling them relics suggests that they're not used anymore. So unfortunately, her mother's not able to actually live this fantastic glamorous lifestyle now that she's had a child. Afterwards then, you get this reference to, and now your ghost clatters towards me over George Square. So George Square is part of Glasgow where the mother used to live, and Caroline Duffy is maybe looking at another photograph here, seeing actually her mother walking across George Square in this photograph, and she's imagining it happening. And then afterwards, till I see you clear as scent under the tree with its lights. So the idea of clear as scent has no colour, it's just transparent. So she sees her clear as scent, she's ghostly basically, in other words, and so she can't necessarily see her mother, but she's imagining. Afterwards then, you've got another question to the mother, and whose small bites on your neck, sweetheart? And so that's probably how she used to talk to her mother, in this kind of joking manner, in this kind of cheeky manner as well. And the idea is that the mother has got love bites on her neck, suggesting that obviously she attracts a lot of attention from boys and is very flirtatious and very intimate with them. Moving on then, in the final stanza you've got this cha-cha-cha, the cha-cha obviously being a ballroom dance that she's learnt, and so the mother can dance very well, and the mother used to teach the poet the steps on the way home from mass, and you get this really interesting line, stamping stars from the wrong pavement. And the idea of this one, I've heard a couple of different interpretations, and I think they're both equally good. Stamping stars from the wrong pavement. In Hollywood, they have stars on Hollywood Boulevard that commemorate or celebrate very famous people, but it's the wrong pavement. So the pavements in Glasgow obviously do not have those stars. So when they're stamping stars, they're teaching the steps, and they're actually dancing. It's like the wrong pavement, as if the mother and the daughter are too glamorous to be in Glasgow, or maybe just the mother is too glamorous to be in Glasgow, and she should belong in Hollywood instead. The other interpretation that I've heard of this one is that actually it could be a reference to her being on the wrong pavement, as in not walking the right path, not following the right path and doing the wrong thing. So maybe she is too flirtatious, maybe she's a bit too forward with the boys, the idea of these love bites and actually walking home with lots of different guys after dancing. So maybe she's not walking the right path, and maybe at the same time she's teaching her daughter to also walk the wrong path too. Afterwards then she says, even then I wanted the bold girl winking in Portobello. So Portobello is another part of Glasgow, and it says here that the poet wants the bold girl winking in Portobello. She wants to meet her mother as a youngster. She wants to actually be friends with her mother when the poet wasn't born. So somewhere in Scotland before I was born. That glamorous love lass, where you sparkled and waltzed and laughed before you were mine. And so you've got this like reiteration, how the poet really wants to be with her mother and to actually be friends with her mother before the poet was actually born, because she loves the image of her mother and she wants to meet her in a time when the poet's not born, when she was a little bit funner and a little bit freer and easier.